Montana Territory, 1881. The air was dry, the sky wide and pale blue, and Lawson O'Connell had just dismounted his horse when he heard the shouting. He had come into the town of Red Bluff for supplies, dust clinging to his coat and boots from the long ride north. He had not planned to stay more than a day, but fate never asked permission. The crowd had gathered near the stockyard pen, not far from the saloon. A makeshift platform had been thrown together, rough planks, a crate for standing. Lawson pushed through the cluster of men, sharp voices cutting the air. "She's young, strong, and carrying a child. You'll get 2 for 1, Lawson's chest tightened. On the platform stood a man with a crooked hat and a crooked soul. He grabbed the arm of a woman barefoot, belly round beneath a faded dress, cheeks flushed with shame and heat. She flinched when he pulled her forward. "Let go of her," Lawson said, voice low but cutting clear through the noise. The auctioneer looked down. "You buying or just barking, Cowboy?" Lawson stepped forward. "You're not selling people in this town, least not while I am standing here." The woman's eyes found his, then wide, hazel, full of fear but not broken. He saw the tremble in her fingers, the way she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "She's mine by debt," the man barked. "Her husband's dead and left her owing. I got papers." "You got nothing but trouble," Lawson said. He stepped up to the platform, hand resting on the revolver at his side. The crowd quieted. "You want to fight over a used-up girl and someone else's brat." The man sneered. Lawson stared him down. Then he looked at the woman again. "My name's Lawson O'Connell," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "and I will not let this stand." The woman's lip trembled. She looked like she had not been touched kindly in a long time. "She's not up for sale," Lawson said, "because I'm marrying her right now." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's mouth opened, but he backed off when Lawson stepped closer. "What's your name?" Lawson asked gently. "Aveline," she whispered. "Aveline Thatcher." "Well, Aveline Thatcher," Lawson said, offering his hand. "How do you feel about becoming Aveline O'Connell?" She stared at him, blinking against the sun. Then slowly she placed her hand in his. "All right," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "Yes." The preacher was fetched from inside the saloon. It took 10 minutes. Lawson stood beside Aveline the whole time, never letting go of her hand. She kept her eyes on the ground until the old preacher began reading the words. Then she looked at Lawson and did not look away again. They were married with the sound of horses stomping and a few drunk men laughing in disbelief. But when Lawson turned to her and pressed a kiss to her forehead, it was quiet around them. He helped her down from the platform. She walked carefully, one hand resting on the small of her back. Her belly pushed forward beneath the thin cloth. She could not have been more than 22. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. I did not think anyone would stop him." "Well, he is not going to bother you again." They walked toward the livery where his horse waited. She paused by the trough and took a long drink from the ladle. Lawson waited, watching the way her shoulders relaxed by degrees. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "Nowhere," she said. "I had nowhere left." "Well, now you have me," Lawson said plainly. She looked up at him. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else in them now, something open. "I have a cabin," he said, "up near Pine Ridge, not much, but it is safe. And it is yours now, too," she nodded slowly. "Thank you for stopping him." Lawson reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She froze, but did not pull away. "You do not owe me anything," he said. "You understand me?" "I understand." "Good, because I am not the kind of man who marries a woman to own her. I married you to protect you, and if you want to leave one day, I will not stop you." Her mouth parted, but no words came. He helped her onto the horse, careful of her balance. Then he climbed up behind her, steady and close, his arms braced around her without pressing too tight. They rode out of Red Bluff as the sun dropped low, orange light painting the hills. Aveline leaned back just a little, resting against him. "You really meant it, did you not?" she asked after a while. "Meant what? You married me because you wanted to protect me, not because of the baby." Lawson was quiet for a beat. "I married you because I saw you standing there scared, alone, and still proud. And I knew I would die before I let you be hurt again." Aveline swallowed hard. Her hand reached back and found his. He held it the rest of the ride home. By the time the stars came out, Lawson O'Connell had brought his new wife to his cabin. And though the walls were rough and the bed was narrow, no place on earth had ever felt more like a beginning. The wind cut lower through the pines that night, threading between the logs of the cabin walls, but inside it was warm with the fire and the scent of wood smoke. Lawson had brought in the last of her things, what little she had carried in a threadbare satchel, and set them carefully beside the narrow dresser by the window. Aveline stood near the hearth, one hand resting at the small of her back. Her shoulders rose and fell with a slow, steady rhythm, as if she were still waiting for something to strike. She hadn't asked questions on the ride. Not about him, not about the land, not about what came next. Now she turned toward him, her expression unreadable in the shifting light. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "Started it 2 winters ago," he said, unlacing his boots. "Took time, but I don't mind the quiet." She nodded once, her gaze drifting to the rafters. "It's real quiet out here." "Too quiet," she shook her head. "Just different. I grew up near a rail line. Always some whistle or wheel screeching through." Lawson hung his coat by the door. "You want to sit down?" She hesitated, then lowered onto the bench near the table, both hands resting on her knees. Her fingers tapped lightly against the fabric of her skirt, not nervously, more like she was tracing thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud. "My husband was a cooper," she said. "Barrels. That's how he made his wage." Lawson didn't speak, just settled across from her, elbows resting on the table's edge. "He died in a flash flood out east of Cheyenne," she continued. "Spring thaw came too fast. He went out to help a neighbor move stock and never came home." The fire cracked softly behind them. "I went to his employer for the last of his pay," she said. "They told me he owed more than he earned. Said I'd have to work it off or pay it outright. I had nothing left to pawn." Lawson's jaw shifted, but he kept quiet. "I thought if I got far enough away, maybe someone would take me in. But every town had a man like that one." She looked up at him then, and there was no pleading in her face, just a kind of tired knowing. "I wasn't looking for rescue, Lawson. I need you to understand that." "I do," he said, "but I wasn't looking for a wife either." Life carved plans into both of us. She let out a breath, the tightness in her frame loosening just a fraction. "I don't know how to be someone's wife again. I won't ask you to be anything you're not ready for." She looked away for a moment, then back. "What made you do it?" "Because I saw what kind of man he was," Lawson said, "and I couldn't ride past it." "That's not a reason to marry someone." "No," he said, "but I reckon it's a good reason to stay by their side." She was quiet after that. The logs shifted in the fire, embers rising like sparks into the chimney flue. "I can cook," she said finally. "Not fancy, but enough to keep us fed. You don't have to prove anything. I'm not. I just want to earn my place here." He leaned back slightly, studying her. "Your name's on the deed now, same as mine. That's not something you have to earn." Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Thank you." He stood slowly, moving to the hearth and lifting the kettle onto the hook above the flame. "You want tea?" "I picked up chamomile from a trader last month." She stood too, one hand bracing her side. "That sounds good." He poured the hot water into 2 tin mugs and passed one to her. Their fingers brushed. "Should I take the bed or the pallet?" she asked. "You'll take the bed," he said. "I'll take the floor." Lawson, he raised a brow. You're carrying. I'm not about to let you sleep cold. She didn't argue again. Instead, she sipped her tea, then walked to the bed and sat gingerly on the edge, her back curved forward as she exhaled. I think the baby's turned, she said, hand resting just below her ribs. Been feeling a shift the past 2 days. He didn't answer with words, just nodded once and turned down the lantern. Later, when the fire was low and the wind pressed gently against the cabin walls, Aveline's voice broke the silence. Lawson. Yeah. Good night. He lay on the floor, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring up at the ceiling's dark beams. Good night, Aveline. She didn't speak again, but he heard her breathing slow, and for the first time in many years the quiet around him didn't feel empty. It felt like something beginning. Morning light poured through the chinks in the shutters, soft and gold. The cabin was still, save for the steady rhythm of a spoon scraping against the inside of a tin bowl. Aveline sat at the table, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair braided back, a slow contentment in the way she moved. Lawson had left early, before the sun had cleared the treetops, saying something about checking the fence line near the creek. He hadn't asked her to wait for him, but she had anyway. She rose carefully, rinsed the bowl in the basin with water drawn the night before, then stepped outside, blinking against the brightness. Chickens scratched in the dirt beneath the pine near the shed. The horse grazed further off, near a split-rail gate Lawson had mended with fresh cedar. Aveline wandered to the edge of the yard where a small patch of ground had been cleared. There were furrows already marked, shallow and dry. She crouched, one hand pressed to her side as she lowered herself. The soil was gritty but not barren. It would hold seed. Her fingers traced the rows. She didn't have much to plant, just a sack of dried beans she'd carried since Laramie, but it was a start. Behind her, boots crunched across the path. You plan on putting me out of work? Lawson's voice was low, edged with dry humor. I didn't know you were growing anything, she said, not turning right away. I hadn't yet. Figured I'd wait till the snow finished sulking. She glanced up at him then. I can manage a few rows. I believe you. He crouched beside her, knees creaking. You always plant by feel. I was raised by a woman who didn't believe in measuring sticks, said if the dirt speaks, you listen. He smiled, faint but real. What else did she believe in? Aveline's expression shifted, something distant flickering there. Iron pots, quiet men. And hanging your laundry where the wind could see it. She sounds like she had sense. She did, until the cough took her. Neither of them spoke for a few breaths. A hawk circled above the ridge, its shadow gliding over the grass. You ever seen a baby born? She asked. Lawson shook his head. Only calves and a litter of pups once. Why? I just think I'll need help when the time comes, and I'd rather not have to explain to you what's happening while it's happening. I'll find a midwife, he said. Someone from over near Alder Gulch. They got a widow there, Mrs. Wexley. Helped with births since before the war. Aveline nodded slowly. As long as she's not one to ask questions. She's not. Lost her tongue in a fever when she was a girl. There was a pause, then Aveline let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Well, that's one way to keep things quiet. Lawson's gaze lingered on her profile. You're not what I expected, she tilted her head. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who'd flinch at shadows, someone who'd hide. I did for a while. But you can only pack fear around so long before it rots. He stood, brushing off his palms. You hungry? I could eat. Inside, she stirred cornmeal into the pot while he sliced the last of the venison. The quiet between them had changed, no longer strained, just easy. He handed her a plate and their fingers met again. This time she didn't pull back as they ate. She studied him. You ever had family of your own? No, he said. My folks died of fever when I was 12. After that it was just me and the work. No brothers. 1. Jeremiah. He ran off to chase gold in California. Last I heard, he made it to San Francisco. That was 8 years ago. You think he's still alive? Don't know. Hope so. She chewed a moment, then said, "Do you want this child to be yours, Lawson, not by law but in truth?" He looked straight at her. "That child's under my roof. I'll raise it same as I would my own blood. Even if it's a girl, even more so." She nodded once, slowly. "Then I believe we'll do just fine." That night, after the fire burned low and the lantern was out, Lawson lay awake on the floor, listening to the wind shift through the eaves. The bed creaked softly, and then her voice came, quiet, almost unsure. "Lawson?" "Yeah, I'd rather you slept up here." He didn't answer right away. When he sat up, she was watching him, face half shadowed in moonlight. "Just sleep," she said. "I don't want to be alone anymore." He crossed the room and lay beside her, careful not to touch. But after a while, she turned toward him, her hand finding his beneath the blanket. And in the hush of that night, neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. The first hard rain came 2 weeks later, soaking the soil and waking the scent of pine and damp clay. The roof held mostly, save for a slow drip near the hearth where the pitch had worn thin. Lawson patched it the next morning, boots slipping on the mossy slope, while Aveline boiled wild onions and dried meat into a thin broth. By then, a rhythm had taken root between them, not spoken, just lived. She rose first, moving slow but steady, and he followed her out most days with a leather satchel and his rifle slung across his back. He didn't range far. Not anymore. He came back before dusk, always with something: a skinned hare, firewood, a spool of thread from the outfitter 3 miles south. That morning, as the clouds cleared, Aveline stood at the edge of the porch with her hand resting on the small of her back. Her dress clung damp to her legs, and her braid was still loose from sleep. Lawson joined her with a tin cup of coffee, steam curling into the sharp air. "You ever think about going east?" she asked. He looked out toward the tree line. "Not much calls me that way." "I used to think I might make it to Boston," she said. "Had a cousin there." She wrote once that the streets were paved in stone and the lamps burned all night. "You want stone streets. I want to see what it feels like to not be watched every time I walk into a room." Lawson took a sip. "Out here ain't many folks to watch. Out here folks don't look at you at all unless they want something." He glanced at her sideways. "I look." She turned slightly. "I know, that's different." They didn't speak for a while after that. The forest hummed with new life: frogs in the creek, birds shaking rain off pine limbs. Somewhere far off, trees cracked under the weight of wind-dampened branches. Aveline stepped down into the mud, careful not to slip. "There's a grove uphill past the ridge. I saw it yesterday. Looks like sugar maples. Lot of bears up there." "I wasn't planning to climb a tree." He waited while she reached the tool shed and pulled out a small hatchet. "You want to tap them?" he asked. "I want to see what's possible." He followed her, keeping a pace just behind. They climbed slow, and he pointed where the moss thickened, where the deer trails split. She didn't ask for help when her breath caught, just paused, hand on her belly, and then kept walking. The grove opened suddenly, a wide clearing dappled with sun and shadow. The trees were older, their trunks thick and bark flaking pale. Aveline stepped to the nearest one and pressed her palm to the bark. "My mother used to boil the sap down with cedar shavings," she said. "Made a syrup that tasted like smoke and sweet grass." "She from these parts?" "Choctaw. But she married a man from Arkansas and followed him north." Lawson leaned against a stump, watching her trace the tree's trunk with her fingertips. "You take after her, not in the ways that kept her safe." He didn't press. The wind stirred the clearing and a crow called from somewhere deeper in the woods. Aveline turned then, facing him fully. "I've been thinking about the birth." He straightened. "You feeling something?" "Not yet, but it's close. I can feel the weight shifting lower." He nodded once. "I'll ride out tomorrow, get Mrs. Wexley. She'll want to stay a few days." "I want you with me," she said, "when it happens." "I will be." She might say it's not proper, she can say what she likes. Aveline stepped closer, her boots sinking a little in the soft earth. "I don't want to go through it alone." "You won't." She looked up then, the wind tugging a strand of hair loose from her braid. "You've been kind to me, Lawson, more than I ever expected, but I don't want this to be kindness anymore." He didn't move. "What do you want it to be?" "I want it to be yours," she said. "Not just the name, all of it." Lawson reached for her hand, his fingers rough with callus, hers warm and sure. "And I want to be yours," he said. "Not for show. Not for duty." She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her in slow. Her head rested against his chest, and for a long while they stood like that, the trees quiet around them, the past no longer pressing quite so hard. When they walked back down, the sun was higher and the trail was dry beneath their feet. They didn't look back at the grove. There was no need. What mattered was ahead now. Lawson returned the next afternoon with Mrs. Wexley bundled behind him on the saddle, her face drawn and sharp as a carving knife, but her hands gentle when she touched Aveline's wrist and asked her to lie down. She didn't speak unless she needed to, and Aveline understood her with a glance. They made space for each other, the way women do when something important is coming. The birth settled on them 3 nights later, with the moon high and the air damp as a wrung cloth. Aveline woke with a tightness low in her belly, stronger than anything before. She didn't cry out. She sat up, braced her hand on the side of the bed, and whispered Lawson's name once. He was already halfway to standing. She gripped his arm and didn't let go as he helped her to the pallet Mrs. Wexley had made ready near the hearth. The older woman knelt beside her, pressing cool cloth to her temples, murmuring in her quiet, rasping way and checking the baby's progress with calm, practiced hands. Lawson didn't leave. He stayed kneeling at the head of the pallet, Aveline's fingers wrapped around his like rope. Sweat rolled down her neck. Her breath came in hard pulls. She didn't weep. Not once. But she trembled, and Lawson pressed his forehead to hers between contractions. When it was time, Mrs. Wexley gave a short nod, and Aveline bore down with a growl that came from somewhere deeper than pain. Then again, and again. It was past midnight when the child came slick and red and furious with life. A girl. Aveline didn't speak at first. She only stared at the crying bundle, breath shallow, lips parted. Lawson reached for the cloth Mrs. Wexley handed him and wrapped the baby carefully. Then he placed her into Aveline's arms. She looked down at the infant, then up at him. "Her name is Clara," she said. Lawson brushed the hair from her damp brow, his hand shaking just slightly. "She's perfect," he said. Aveline didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered, catching every bit of firelight. Clara's tiny fist curled against her chest, quiet now, as if she knew she had landed somewhere safe. Mrs. Wexley laid out herbs to steep for the bleeding and packed her things without needing to be asked. Before dawn, Lawson hitched up the mare and took her halfway back to her valley homestead, promising to send supplies come the next thaw. By the time he returned, the cabin smelled of milk and pine. Aveline sat propped in bed, Clara asleep in the crook of her arm. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable for a moment. "You're back," she said. "Always." He set down the satchel and stepped to the bed. She shifted slightly, making room for him to sit beside her. "She has your nose," he said, looking at Clara. "She has your calm," Aveline replied. He glanced at her. "You were brave." "I didn't feel brave." "You were." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Then she turned to him, her hand reaching for his. "I want you to be her father," she said, "not just in name. I want you to teach her everything. I want her to grow up knowing she was wanted every day." "She was," he said. "You both were." Aveline leaned into his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, careful of the baby between them. Outside, the snow had melted into patches, softening the edges of the world. Spring came slow but steady. Lawson built a cradle from pine he'd felled himself, shaping each piece by hand. He sanded the corners smooth, not because he had to, but because he wanted no part of it to leave a mark. Aveline healed strong. Her body bore the signs of birth, but her steps grew sure again, and her eyes carried something rooted now. They planted beans and squash, and Clara slept in a sling against Aveline's chest as she worked. Lawson taught her to use the rifle one-handed while Clara napped, and Aveline taught him how to read the wind by the way the crows flew. They didn't speak of the past because it didn't ask for attention anymore. It had lost its sharpness. By the following year, the child had curls the color of sun-warmed honey, and a laugh that rang out like bells over the hills. She walked early, talked late, and followed Lawson everywhere he went, toddling after his boots with stubborn determination. Aveline watched them one evening from the porch Clara balanced on her father's shoulders, Lawson pointing out toward the ridge where elk sometimes grazed. She rested her hands on her hips, warmth blooming in her chest. When he returned, Lawson lifted Clara gently into her mother's arms, then leaned in and pressed a kiss just below Aveline's jaw. "You're everything I never knew I needed," he said, voice low. She turned toward him. "You're my home," she said. They stood together as the sun dipped behind the hills, the cabin casting a long shadow over the soft earth. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the world, for the first time in either of their memories, felt whole. And that was how they lived, not in grandeur or noise, but in the quiet strength of shared days. Aveline, Lawson, and Clara. A family not born of ease but of choice, forged in the hard light of Montana and softened by love that had been earned, one steady step at a time.